Welcome back. We will now reconvene on August 6, 2024, the policy session for the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners. Administrator Gary Smith, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Commissioners West and Schrader are around somewhere. They'll be here any moment. Our first policy session is Clackamas Workforce Partnership 2024-2025 Budget and 2024-2028 Strategic Plan. Our staff from Economic Development will be the key presenter, but we'll also have our team from Clackamas Workforce Partnership. So please come forward. Laura Edmonds, the manager of the Office of Economic Development, and Bridget Daisy, the executive director of Clackamas Workforce Partnership. Thank you.
Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Hi. Good afternoon, Chair Smith, Commissioners. Laura Edmonds, the manager of the Office of Economic Development for Clackamas County.
Good afternoon, Bridget Daisy, she, her, they, the Executive Director of Clackamas Workforce Partnership.
All right, and so thank you again, and Chair Smith, good to see you back. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So greetings. We come before you today seeking your approval of Clackamas Workforce Partners 2024-25 budget and their 24-28 draft strategic plan. The Board of County Commissioners' concurrence of the CWP draft strategic plan is required by the state of Oregon and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, which is HEC. In order for CWP to be considered as the recipient and administrator of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds, which is WIOA, is how I'll refer to it today, the statement of concurrence is a new form required by HEC this year. It is required in order to verify that the draft strategic plan fulfills CWP's requirements to align their plan and the WIOA funding requirements. WIOA was signed into law in 2014, and the WIOA funds are allocated through HEC and distributed out to workforce boards to administer for workforce development grants and their communities. As stated in the 2016 CWP Clackamas County Partnership Agreement, CWP has a number of commitments, including the two we're here to talk about today, to develop the annual budget and subject to your approval, the Board of County Commissioners, and develop and approve the Clackamas Workforce Area's Strategic Workforce Plan for submission to the Governor. In a moment, Bridget is going to cover the presentation, the PowerPoint that was provided to you in your packet, which is Attachment A. In that presentation, she'll also cover the rest of the attachments. Attachment B, the 2024 CWP budget packet. Attachment C, the statement of concurrence. Attachment D is the CWP 24-28 draft strategic plan, and Attachment E is the WIOA Title I federal assurances. So I'm going to hand it off to Bridget so she can do her presentation, and then we'll have time for Q&A, and then we will also go into, then we'll talk about the options and recommendations after her presentation.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Bridget Daisy, she, her, they, the Executive Director of Clackamas Workforce Partnership. And I've brought with me one of our board members who is also serving as our Secretary Treasurer, Tracy Rumsey, and he's with Quanex out of Malala. So if we have any specific questions directed toward the board, I want him to be here just to entertain those. So as you have in your packet, and I don't have a clicker, so I'll let you know to.
Oh, here.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right, so we're going to start with our strategic plan and then move into the budget and then entertain any questions that you might have. So as Laura mentioned, we operate under the federal law, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, specifically Title 1B, which is the Adult Dislocated Worker and Youth part of WIOA. Part of WIOA is overseeing the public workforce system, and that's the role of the local workforce development board. And as you see here on this third slide, the 13 functions of a workforce board include everything from program oversight of the system, brokering, leveraging relationships with economic development, education partners, and community-based organizations, ensuring that there's broad coordination with education partners from early learning all the way through higher education. And that first one that's bolded is developing a local plan. So the local plan is really meant not to be just a Clackamas Workforce Partnership plan, but a community plan as we're striving to solve and support community members and employers in the Clackamas area. Back in 2023, we started having conversations around modifying our mission vision. So this is our most recent mission vision that was approved by the board this last year, and our values, which have not changed over the last 6 years. Just to do some overview of our strategic plan, the first section of our strategic plan that's mandated for us to be completed by the Higher Education Coordinating Commission really is where that strategic vision and leadership comes out. So in a coming slide, I'll show you the goals, the broad goals that we have in our 3 areas. The rest of it is really a snapshot in time of the work that we're doing as an organization and within the system. And so you'll see the data and analysis around both populations and demographics, as well as sectors and industries that are booming in our area, and then what do our services and programs look like? What do operations look like? Who are we contracting with, and how does that work? And then that 5th section is compliance, which is them asking us about our policies and audits and monitoring and how we're complying with the federal law. The strategic plan, again, we started planning in 2023. We've engaged community members in public comment. We've had focus groups and used our advisory groups and our board to really help inform the direction of the plan and our work for this next 4 years. And so that Title I statement of concurrence is our last component of a complete and final plan. So we're hoping that we can get that signed today. And to go over the strategic plan goals for the next 4 years, we have a business goal, a people goal, and a systems goal. I'll let you read through those, and if you have any specific questions about how the tactics and strategies that we plan to use, I'm happy to answer those, and how we measure our success of the plan. Next is our 2024 program year 2024 budget. All of this is in your packet, so if you have any specific questions about the details, but what I do want to make sure that you see is that within the packet in the board-approved budget, 68% of our budget was targeted and meant it was going to be contracted into the community. That number is actually increased over the course of the last 2 months because we had some attrition, and we are not backfilling that position. So as a result, we're going to have more funds going out into the community as opposed to staying back at CWP. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was our capacity building and recovery assistance program. We were one of 3 recipients of funds to support local nonprofits around just technical assistance and capacity building. And we have been doing work with over 8 nonprofits in the area, and we have also been helping support them with human resources, communications, other fund development and grant development and programs. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer that. And that is my brief presentation to you all.
Any questions for the presenters on this? Thank you for this very in-depth presentation today and a lot of information. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, thanks for all your work, Bridget. Where are we in reauthorization? That hasn't happened yet, has it?
No,
And I know we've
the
been tracking
Senate is on recess right now at the federal level, and they come back in September, and then they'll be picking it back up again. But we are really encouraged by the conversations and the bill that has been floating around. So we anticipate WIOA will be reauthorized this year, and that's what we're planning for. There will be changes to how the system functions as a result of that we'll have to put into policy and evolve around, but we are anticipating some change coming down from them.
Okay, and what are some of those changes, do you think? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah, there's been conversation and bill language around how much of our funds are spent on training dollars and education dollars. There's been some, there's some language about changing regions because WIOA came into effect in 2014, and really what it was is a continuation of WIA, which was
Yeah,
the
right.
Workforce Investment Act. Workforce Board regions have really been a partnership between local areas like the Board of County Commissioners and the Governor's Office. Within the new law, they're talking about how WIOA regions need to be reevaluated as a result of the bill passing. And so I think there's some language about in the first 3 years, there'll be a conversation about like, are the regions within any given state, is it reasonable to change or modify those? And so we'll be paying very close attention to that. And then there's some language around how certain programs are delivered through the one-stop system, so. But if you need some specific bullet points, happy to get those to you.
Okay, thank you. I would like that if you could, because I've been tracking it for a while.
Yes, you have, and thank you for that. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Good afternoon. A few questions for you. You mentioned that WIOA provides some human resources to those 8 nonprofits you mentioned. What kind of human resources support do you give the nonprofits?
Mostly assistance and funds for helping develop policies or professional development for their staff, or helping with onboarding of new staff.
And about how much is spent on that endeavor each year?
Oh, for the whole CBRA program, or
just for
HR?
the HR support to the 8 nonprofits.
I would have to get that information, so I can come back with that.
Okay. The other question is, what's your primary means to bring to the attention of the people of Clackamas County this WIOA program? What's your outreach like? To bring this program to the attention of the people of the county.
Absolutely. Well, we are developing a new communications plan this year that we'll be implementing, but our traditional modes are through social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then also through our Workforce Partner Network. We have a wide array of partners that are delivering direct service for housing or food security and food support. So we are distributing information through a lot of local nonprofits and local communities. We're also going and presenting either at events or conferences. And then there are various events around the metro area that will have tabled, the work source services. And everything that's wrapped up in our services is in partnership with all of the work source partners. So if work source is there, then they're representing part of our programs too.
Okay, I see. Last question. The budget you have presented here, what's the % increase over the 23-24 budget?
It's,
In other words,
says
how
a
much has your
percentage.
budget grown in the last year?
we received an overall 4.91% increase in our WIOA funds from last year.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all my questions.
A 1% increase is,
A 4% increase. The state received a 19% increase, and we usually hover in the lower numbers of what we
That they allocate.
get as far as an increase.
thank
or
you.
decrease.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, while I understand the mission of CWP, I'm wondering if there is a one sheet, kind of a spreadsheet that tells us in all the sectors where we are fully staffed or not, the industries, and where those needs are. I can see some of the sectors kind of mentioned indirectly, but there's not really a one-page or spreadsheet kind of, unless I missed it in the 70 pages.
Oops, I've done that.
Yes, in the analysis in that section too, there would be that information. There's not a one page. It's a really complex conversation to have about like how fully staffed are we at any one moment in time, because it's an evolving thing. But what I would say is most industries are struggling to keep staff and also to recruit into staff, depending on what the levels are. So we've been really promoting a quality jobs initiative in the area to say, like, what jobs do we have in the area and how can we increase more of those to be quality jobs? But if you want more specific information about what's our current target level, for example, for construction and where that gap is, we can get you some of that information, but it's not gonna, I don't know that it would fit in on one page.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
it could be 2 pages, right? I thought necessarily saying 1 page, but I was just trying to get a sense of, like construction, is it, on the plumbing side? Is it on the, some detail to understand where those needs are, and that might even help industry or labor know where to up their game. I'm sure they probably already have a pretty good sense of that, but from our standpoint up here at the dais, I'd love to know how we're
Oh,
doing.
absolutely. Well, and what I'd like to direct you to too is, and I'll send it, is we did an interstate bridge replacement study about what the workforce needs be in order to do a full bridge replacement. And we need about no less than 30,000 new construction workers over the next 10 years in order to make all of that happen. So we are in big need of workforce development across that sector for sure. But yeah, we'll get you some more information about the various industries.
Well, I appreciate that example because that's something I've been trying to make people aware of, that if we got a lot of money to do more road construction projects, bridges, whatever they may be, there's not enough workers out there to do the work. And there may not be enough other factors like steel or whatnot, but that from the employment side, it'd be nice to know, like I said, if you can send me something, I'd appreciate it,
Okay.
having that level of detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Is that it? Bridget, you said 30,000 workers were needed for the I-5 bridge replacement process. Workers. Is that workers or is that jobs? And there's a difference.
Yeah, it will be workers. It's over a period of like a decade. And I will actually get you that number because now that I'm even saying it out loud, I want to make sure that I get you the right number. So don't quote me on that.
Mr. Schrader?
Yeah, Laura, what is the nexus between what you're doing with economic development and workforce? Because you're really organizing, looking at our clusters and what's emerging. So how does that work with our workforce board? How do we take, in other words, when we're doing career pathways, how do we see, like AI, for example, right? It's a new, huge, innovative thing that's happening across the United States, and getting people who are technically proficient in order to work in that arena is going to be a real issue. So how do you juggle that, making sure there's a pipeline with the employers really involved in it? That's
Well, I think how we juggle it, we're depending on a lot of our partners like Bridget, like Clackamas Community College, some of the investment we're making for the CTE programs and accredited scholarships, right, that you have approved and support. So, and we are currently still waiting for our economic analysis report, right, that will tell us, but that's, no matter how we look at that, that's historical information. And so what we're looking at too is various sources of data that come into us to tell us what sectors or subclusters are emerging, and then what kind of businesses that represents into those subclusters, so we can identify then the kinds of laborers and skills that then are being required. So as we're looking at future job growth, we're trying to take all of that information, disseminate it, and then work with Bridget, with other partners, to be able to identify where the opportunity is for that workforce development. So there's a lot of partners that are working collaboratively together to be able to grow that workforce. So it's a lot, it's a simple question, but it's a very difficult, complex answer. And so we're working collaboratively with all of them to do that.
because it's pretty fluid out there.
It's
That's the
very
other thing.
fluid,
Change
and-
happens quickly.
Yeah, and we're seeing, so what's consistent in our part of the region, in Clackamas County for industry, could vary compared to what's going on in Washington County, as an example, right? So there's different opportunity in the various markets for us, where we really have a stronghold, like in manufacturing, wholesale. There's a number of different industries that we can cater to more easily on this side. So,
Okay, thank you for that.
Commissioner West?
I feel like that your core mission is somewhat in conflict with real industry and jobs and what we're seeing. We just saw John Deere completely back away from diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. So as Microsoft, we have seen companies lose a significant amount of money, and actually a lot of studies have come out and shown that it is quite divisive within the core values of business and actual production. And so for me, to me, it's clear that making sure your core values as a company, your core efforts as a company about creating profit so that not only does that benefit your customers and benefits your business, but that trickles down and actually helps people get jobs and training, and it filters into the community. Businesses are quite generous with their nonprofits. So to me, it's businesses should be focusing on merit, fairness, and making sure people have equal opportunity to use their talents and skills. And that should be the core focus within a business and core values. We've seen just a big shift in industry. It seems like you guys really, though, promote a lot around something that's really, I don't know if your DEI is focused more on people's immutable traits and getting them in through business and focusing on those efforts and some of that race essentialism, or if it's focused on more as a socioeconomic kind of focus that is regardless of people's immutable traits. Since we've seen a big shift in our culture recently and in the conversation nationally around DEI and its benefit to business, why do you still strongly support it here with your organization?
Well, I don't see it as being mutually exclusive to a business's core mission. I believe that the people that are working within our community do need access to those quality jobs, those opportunities, and that is going to require us to think about what inclusion could look like. How do we make sure that people feel safe at work? How do we make sure that people can show up and be either their authentic selves or bring all their gifts and skills to their workplace? And so we really promote that people are diverse in our community, and we want to make sure that regardless of that diversity, they have access to those opportunities that exist within our community. So,
do you believe a company's resources should be used to hire somebody based on their immutable traits, or there should be quotas for people based on their immutable traits to be hired within a company?
I think all of our companies are going to operate differently and have different policies about how they
But that
manage
wasn't what I
their
asked.
staff.
That wasn't what I asked.
You asked how businesses.
I said, do you believe that business and industry should promote and do workforce initiatives based on an individual's immutable traits? Should hiring, should the outlay of resources be based on an individual's immutable traits?
I believe staffing should be based on many things. And I think the skills that one brings as well as their propensity to learn, I think those are two examples of somebody might not have something right now, but they have the propensity to learn. And
I'm just concerned that your organization is really pushing, and right before us in this packet, something that we are having a larger national debate on, but is actually has had quite a bit of division around it, and it doesn't actually focus on the core essential things that make a business successful, which I think overall is the best thing to kind of lift all boats based on socioeconomic status. This type of language tends to focus heavily on people's immutable traits, and and not necessarily on their skill set and on their merit. And that I'll just be honest, that has me concerned with what I see in the packet.
Thank you. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, let me reframe this a little bit, because what I look at this as is not, a political piece. It's a prosperity piece. And people can't get good jobs unless they have access to the training that they need. And it's moving people up an economic ladder so they can be participating folks in a democracy, which I think is critically important. And that I think the point is that there probably are some communities that for whatever reason haven't had equal access. So I see it more as equal access and moving up a prosperity ladder rather than an ideological, you're this, you're that. It's just some people have more access than others, and the thing is, okay. And that's why I always bring up the Canby Center, because that's what they did. That's what they're doing.
Okay.
And so they're a huge partner with these folks to do that.
Thank
So-
you very much. We have a 1:30 session, and we need to take some action on this presentation. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, just want to say, Commissioner West, that from being an employer and understanding the challenges of trying to recruit people, I was very rarely ever fully staffed and always struggled to find people, no matter where I was, whether it was Clackamas County or Lane County. And I would say that I look at it from a different perspective is what can you do to encourage people to enter the workforce? So if you apply that a culture where everyone's welcome to be recruited, then it's not that it's the goal to do it, but it is a means in which to draw people in to increase the workforce in the recruitment pool, right? Because if there is this underlying fear or belief that a particular class of people are not welcome, and that's, let's say, a huge population, that could add to the labor pool if they feel they're welcome. So I just look at it differently.
I agree, Commissioner Savas. I just think that I will fight tooth and nail because that would be illegal because we have the Civil Rights Act and other legislation that protects that from happening. We're not allowed to discriminate basis on the race. But unfortunately, this is quite a divisive. This is not an apolitical statement to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And actually, it insults a lot of customers of these businesses. And that's why a lot of businesses across our country have backed away from promoting these type of policies. Some people call them woke, some people call them other things. I just want to make sure that, you know, if we really cared about making sure those people had access, maybe the schools in Portland and throughout the metro area, we wouldn't rank 50th in the nation in education. And maybe we can make sure that those kids that come from disadvantaged areas actually get the education they need. Maybe we'd have really serious conversations around that, but that's also based on not just individuals' races, but making sure people in our population overall has the skill set that they need. I just am uncomfortable moving anything forward that is really quite divisive even in the business community around this philosophy. So that's where I stand on that. I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity regardless of their race or immutable traits, and maybe look more closely to like socioeconomic status, because when you're really poor, regardless of your race or your sexuality or whatever, you're just really poor and trying to put food on the table and trying to learn something. But this state in this area has been really hell-bent on focusing on race essentialism, and I see this as an extension of that, and it has me concerned.
Okay.
Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner West, for your sensitivity on this. He's right in terms of the terms, those three words used in the mission statement. You know, what I'd like to see is a mission statement that is focusing on equal opportunity and equal access to all people, regardless of immutable traits, and to encourage all people to work towards their best selves and their most productive future. Those words I like better. Thank you.
I would have to agree with my other two commissioners on this. We've had so much conversation around this, and here we have language that slaps us in the face. Gary, we have some recommendations
Yes.
on adopting the strategic plan and the budget on this.
Yes.
I will entertain a motion.
I move we adopt the strategic plan of Clackamas Workforce Partnership.
Do you want to pull in the plan and the budget all in one motion?
Yeah, let's do
Would you
that.
do that, please?
I would like to approve the Clackamas Workforce Partnership Plan and its proposed budget for the next 2 years.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Schrader has moved we adopt the strategic workforce investment plan and budget, and Commissioner Savas has seconded the motion. Further discussion? Tony, take the poll.
Commissioner Scholl.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
No.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Abstain. Motion passes 3-1-1. Laura Edmonds, you have a comment.
There is a second proposed that is authorizing Chair Smith to sign the statement of a concurrence as the chief local elected official in order for the WIOA funds. That's the statement of concurrence document that's required by HEC for the
Where
state
is
of
that?
Oregon. And that is the attachment, hang on a minute.
What page, do you know?
It's I'll have to find the page. So attachment C, and you're gonna go all the way back to, sorry, it is a big packet of information. It should be right after the presentation. Hang on a minute. My apologies.
That's okay, we'll wait. It's a
Yeah.
70-page
Well,
document, so it's very long.
Yeah, it is long. So it is attachment C. That's interesting. It is all the way back.
Page 17 of the
Page
packet is
17 of the
the
packet, yeah,
statement of
thank you.
concurrence.
There's a lot here.
Signature page, we the undersigned. I'll take it under advisement,
Okay,
and we'll let you know.
okay.
Thank you, Gary. What's up next?
Very good, thank you.
you.
Next policy session is Red Soils Master Plan Update. This will be presented by the County Administration and Finance Department team, Nancy Bush, County Operating Officer, Jeff Jorgensen, Facilities Division Director, and we have George Hager from Sarah Architects, who helped with the plan. So they'll all come forward, and Nancy will kick it off. Go ahead, please, Nancy.
Hi, good afternoon, Commissioners. So today we're here to talk to you about the Red Soils Master Plan. This plan is something that is required whenever we have something that has changed on campus that is significant, such as building a courthouse, which of course we have now done. So the document that is required will be filed with Oregon City as the land use jurisdiction. The plan will then provide Oregon City on guidance on what is currently on the property and what we may be doing in the future. The master plans are also, they usually cover, 5 to 20 years. The last one we did was in 2019, and that was when we anticipating having the OSU Extension building here on this campus, which now, of course, has changed, and they're working at putting that at CCC. And I just want to remind all of you before we get into the details of some of the plans, what used to be there, what it looks like now, and what it's changing to, that this is only a plan. It is not a priority list. It is not set in stone. It's a plan. It could change because we could change what we may want to do or not do with this particular campus. And at that time, we would, of course, go for permitting, but this is what the plan that we would be looking at that time whenever we go for permitting for new structures or different things we may do on this campus. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Jorgensen to kind of go over what the differences are and what we're asking for your approval on today.
Thank you, Jeff.
Afternoon,
Go ahead.
Commissioners, Administrator Schmidt. So George Hager is from Sarah Architects. He was the architect that led this project and the update. So George will go ahead and cover the major changes, and I'll kind of clean up, and we can take any questions you're going to have. But go ahead, George.
Go ahead, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is George Hager, principal with Sarah Architects. Thank you, commissioners and staff, for inviting me to speak to you about your master plan update today. So, as stated previously, this master plan is really just an update of some of the major changes that has happened on this campus. The biggest one is the courthouse. But there's been some other changes too. There's construction of some parking lots. There's been some demolition of buildings. And then the document itself provides diagrams that really itemizes those changes. You know, there's some changes, there's some road change requirements, there's some other things, but it also updates the narrative. We've simplified some of the language in the narrative. We've tried to genericize some of the things, like rather than county office building, we just say office building, you know, things like that. So once the county courthouse was contemplated in the data that it had, it updated a bunch of tables for the master plan. And so there's just some changes in things that come together, you know, with this master plan. So as the entire campus is contemplated, it's just, you know, bringing everything in, and this is the next evolution of that.
Yeah, so basically, we're going to have to find out, we'll go ahead and requesting approval of this document to go before the city of Oregon City. We'll have to apply with Oregon City, and they'll determine whether it's a type 2 or a type 3 hearing. So if it's type 3, then we have to go and present to the board. But we want to go ahead and request approval of this document, so at least we have an approved document to go before the Board of Oregon City of what the guidelines are here. Like I said, this is not a plan. The courthouse or any building that we build here or demolish, like we talked about this morning, we have to have permits for. They're all separate projects. This is just the guidelines of what we go over there. I mean, sometimes we've had issues with Oregon City that it's like, well, that looks like you're supposed to be doing this. It's a guideline. It's not a permitted construction project or demolition. It's just where we are, where we have been, where we are, and where we're going in the future is kind of the plan there. So,
Thank you. And this is a requirement, a legal requirement. When we make a significant change on our campus,
Yes.
we need to submit another master plan. Is that correct?
yes.
I have a quick question for the architect. I'm looking at the drawing on page 18, the middle drawing, and I had talked to a staff member about this before. Inside the little red dotted slash line, there is the Schaefer Building. The Schaefer Building is on the inside of, indicating that the Schaefer Building area is part of the master plan. Is that correct?
Schaefer's the one up there.
Yes, it is part of the master plan.
Okay. I asked that question because I was told it was not going to be part of the master plan since ownership was in question because of its purpose and its previous owner.
It was actually discussed with the sheriff's office, and we met with major departments to make sure that we have input from them, and we met several times with Angie and Jenna, but I mean, the Schaefer Building is part of the campus, 68 acres.
Well, I hope it is. I'm concerned that the proper paperwork hasn't been done to make that a reality. And if we were wanting to remodel or expand the use at the Schaefer Building, would we be allowed to do it?
Currently, it's still a GSA-owned property.
What does that mean?
Government services,
Government.
the U.S. government owns that building.
So it's the U.S. government, it's not Clackamas County government. Yes, Jeff, that's exactly my point in this, and it should not be included inside those hash marks. Right?
It's, yes, it's the U.S. government, but they've given it unto us to be administered by the sheriff's office.
I am not 100% clear on that going forward. I can okay this plan today, I'm okay with, but there is a question about the ownership of that building. Let's say we wanted to go and we wanted to demolish the whole thing,
Right.
take it over and build a new structure.
I would agree with you that it actually had three categories where we could apply for. One was law enforcement, one was health services, and education was the third one. We applied for it under the sheriff's, and totally agree with you. It's hanging out there for a long time, and we had recent discussions that said we should talk to GSA and say, just give the building to us. It
So-
should be turned over.
Mr. Architect, you have this inside as part of the master plan, so we can master plan that whole corner every which way we want, correct?
Yes.
I don't know if I'm all hot.
Could I make it a suggestion?
Yes.
Maybe could we in the document make it clear that that property is owned by the U.S. government? And that as long as we work, as long as we do with it what they want us to do with it, it can be a part of this planning. But maybe we can just make it clear in the document that we do not own that building, that it's U.S. government. Would that work for you, Chair?
Yes, that would work for me.
Yeah, and we can update that with that language.
Okay.
I don't know who's first. Who wants to be first?
I'd be happy
Mr.
to.
Scholl?
Okay, so the master plan, to me, looks good. The one building that I have a question on is building number 9, which is right across the street. You have it marked retail and office, 70,000 square feet. Why was that site, why did you come up with that purpose for that building on that particular location?
In past presentations to the commissioners and designs, that was requested that we would put a building on that corner. Ultimately, Beaver Creek Road, where it comes down from Warner Milne, you have the curve.
Yeah.
Oregon City is going to make sure that we actually have to go ahead and make it more like an L. It's got to be a sharper curve to slow down traffic, on our campus. Oregon City's requirement for this.
Okay.
But to put a building there, the question is, what is in the building? We've talked about first floor retail, we've talked about second floor lawyers. It's a building that's there and can be manipulated in size or whatever. There's an advantage that it has parking behind it, but parking on our campus is looked at as in a whole.
Okay.
So-
So I just have a hard time understanding why we would use this limited space we have on our campus up here for a retail purpose.
It could be the coffee shop, dry cleaners, anything on the first floor is what they're talking about. And so you could go ahead and create buildings and lease it out to lawyers, but that's up to us to do that. It doesn't restrict us when we say office building. If we say county office building, like George was talking about, Oregon City looks at, it's got to be a county building. If we say office building, it could be county, it can be private. It leaves it open a lot more for us just to say office building.
Well, I'd like to just put a bug in everybody's ear today. We're all concerned, not just the Board of Commissioners, but everybody in the county is concerned about building a recovery center in our county sooner than later. And I can't help but think that somewhere on our campus up here might be an ideal location for such a facility. And I can't help but think that the location where you have building number 9 here, retail and office space, might be something to think about. Something just to think about in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Commissioner West?
You stole my thunder a little bit, Commissioner Scholl.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. I guess I had the exact same questions around Building 9. Why would we use taxpayer dollars to build office space and then for non-county attorneys, dry cleaners, or businesses to operate in?
Well, first of all, if you build an office space, whether it's here, wherever we build one, you have them lease it for a period of time. In 20 years, it's paid off. It's our county building and it's paid off.
I see.
But
Yeah.
it's up to us.
I guess
It doesn't have to go that way.
Is the county's, because look at, if I look here, sorry, I'm getting to that point where I need glasses and I don't have them with me. So Chair Smith is laughing at me, but I'm getting there. So number 7 says office building 7, number 8 says office building is an office building, and then retail office or whatever that is 9. As we have major county priorities and funding restrictions and things and big projects that we do need to get up and running that are arguably the function of an actual local government, like a recovery campus, that is a nice piece of land potentially, or we even have, where we talk, we have originally in that place, the 4-H building was gonna go. A lot of things have been talked about, but putting that initial kind of investment down for generic office space was, I think, as in today's market, at least it's not as desirable. It's also had somewhat of a struggle within the market of actually filling office space. We have empty office space in this big giant building as we speak that's not utilized. Building more of that, I'm having a hard time seeing that in our master plan.
So
That's one of my concerns.
thank you for your questions. Responding to both of you, these are generic terms for these buildings. The percentage of office to retail can change when we get to the very specific design of a building. There's development standards that Oregon City requires, and we are in control, you are in control of that. You brought up clinic space. Often in the code that is defined as an office space unless it's something very specific. So you can have these type of very specific uses that you're all thinking about, but for us in this master plan, they're just generic terms like office buildings. You can have dental offices or medical clinics that are outpatient care, but they're called office buildings. Retail is something that might be a convenience factor for either yourself, your county workers, or the customers that are using it. And when I say customers, I really mean citizens that are visiting your buildings. Those are the type of things that you might want to think about that provide those conveniences for your staff. So these really are very generic terms. When we get to the very specific design of these buildings, that's when we really get down to how many square feet of retail, how many square feet of office. And it's not just office at that time. We're talking about something very specific that staff is telling us, hey, we need this kind of building for this very specific kind of use. So
I think that's a great clarification, as we basically have a brand-new anchor tenant in a courthouse that's going to bring a lot of bodies up here.
Yep.
It's a different, it just is, and it is not easy for us to take just even get in 1 hour to run and grab something to eat and get stopped. One constituent stops and talks to us, outside the restaurant, we're running late to get right back to the meeting that we have to be in. So we don't have much on this end. That makes sense to me. This begs a question for me, because I know that we have updated, we have the current, and then we have the future. How common and how likely is it to continue to have changes to a master plan as things evolve? Like, I'm just kind of curious about process, I guess.
On average, we've had it about every 5 years.
About every 5 years, a master plan changes?
Yes.
Okay, I think I knew the answer to that. I just wanted that to be on the record, that it's not something that is necessarily set in stone and biblical, that it can't be adjusted based on current issues.
And like George was saying, so when you're looking at buildings 7 or 8, we've talked with H3S, and, we have the Beaver Creek Clinic.
Yeah.
Ultimately, in the future, Beaver Creek Clinic will have to be replaced. It could be building 7 or 8. It's just an office building until we apply for it.
Perfect.
Same thing on 7. We could go ahead and remove retail, but it's just an office building for us to go ahead and plan. The courthouse, we will have a little cafe. DSB's cafe will open at the same time. We're looking at this fall going out to contract to go ahead and get those 2 back opened up for at least to grab a sandwich and some soup.
Thank you for the clarification, and thanks for being here with your presentation.
Thank you. We have 2 more commissioners. Who wants to go next?
Sure, I just want to just say that, been through this before, and I kind of look at this as something that is very flexible, but it does, I want to say, at least with the city of Oregon City, kind of preserve our right, if you will, to build what we say we think we're going to build, but that doesn't mean that we can't change it. So all I want to just say is that be mindful of Lot 6, what that's intended to be, has been the jail. Which is now we're building the parking lot, the south parking lot, I guess, right, Jeff?
That's correct.
So that is where ultimately the jail would be located, unless that could change as well, right?
It could change.
Yeah. So just want to just point that
We
out.
already have part of a parking lot there for a new jail.
Correct.
All right. Is that it,
Yep, that's all I
Commissioner
have.
Schrader?
Yeah, I just want to say, I've been through like 5 or 6 iterations of the master plan. None of it's written in stone. Well, you've been talking about it being, retail was just an idea we had years ago.
Correct.
Like I said, so people could eat on the place. It's not, none of this is, it just gives you an idea of where we do have possibilities for development here. And we've always thought of the jail and then the juvenile facility, about replacing those 2. People were upset with us back in the day because we did prioritize the courthouse, which was necessary, but like I said, the projects are always in motion, and we can change it as we see fit as we move forward. And 20 years from now, when we're all gone or enjoying retirement or something, maybe it'll be a different change.
We had quite a few meetings with departments, a lot of them, to go ahead and make sure that at least this plan meets the current needs.
Right. Yeah.
But again, needs change.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to entertain a motion on page 2.
I move that the board approve the updated Red Soils Master Plan and direct staff to submit the plan to the City of Oregon City for review.
Second.
Commissioner Scholl has moved that the board approve the updated Red Soils Master Plan and direct staff to submit the plan to the City of Oregon City for review. Commissioner Savas has seconded that motion. Any further discussion? Would the clerk please take the poll?
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much for coming forward and answering all of our questions on this. Gary, we're going to take a few minutes of a break, and we will reconvene at 2 p.m. Thank you. Welcome back. to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Policy Session on August 6th at 2 p.m. Administrator Gary Schmidt, would you please tee it off?
Yes, thank you, Chair Smith. The next policy session is noise control ordinance amendments. From the County Council's office, you requested this, Commissioners, and we are here to bring this back to you. Jane Veto, County Counsel, Caleb Hugel, Assistant County Counsel, will present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The county has a noise ordinance. It prohibits unreasonably loud and raucous noises. That's sort of a subjective prohibition. There are more objective prohibitions, like noises over a certain decibel range at certain times of day. It exempts certain kinds of noises from those prohibitions, and it authorizes persons to request temporary noise variances from those prohibitions for, let's say, a concert or some event they know is going to blow past those limits. And today we're concerned with those noise variances. And we have three specific concerns. The first is that the code in its current form says that noise variance applications are processed by the sheriff's office. That's only concerning because in practice, they're processed by code enforcement. The second concern is that the code provides that noise variance decisions can be appealed to the Board of Commissioners, which is kind of unusual. You might recall that the county processed such an appeal earlier this year. And in that case, the Board of Commissioners delegated its review authority to Administrator Schmidt temporarily for purposes of that one appeal. And it instructed staff to propose code amendments for a more permanent fix going forward. The third concern is that some of the factors, which we discovered in processing that noise variance appeal, some of the factors for making a decision are less than clear, and they could be clarified. They're just poorly worded. The proposed amendments before you today would address each of those concerns. They'd provide that noise variance applications need not necessarily be processed by the sheriff's office, which would make room for the current practice of code enforcement processing them. They would provide that noise variance appeals don't go to the Board of Commissioners, but instead go to the county's compliance hearings officer, who's more accustomed to making those quasi-judicial determinations. And they'd provide they would propose changes to the verbiage of the noise variance factors to make them more clear and easier to understand if you're an applicant, easier to apply if you are the decision maker. These amendments are intended to be procedural and housekeeping. They're not intended to be substantive, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Commissioners, do we have questions on this?
I do.
Yes, go ahead.
So it's probably not related to this, but one of my issues has been, and I really appreciate actually under the executive summary, really frankly the first couple lines there. But I know that this is getting back to specific noises on specific pieces of property or emitting from property, and essentially. But my issue, again, probably not relevant to this, but any thoughts would be appreciated, is, and I get a lot of complaints about this, is that, whether it's 11 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning, is loud vehicles, people that are racing on the streets, don't have exhaust, and, it's almost become commonplace that, it's legal, when actually, we have noise ordinances, and I don't know what the hang up is there. Again, I know it's not really related to this per se, but I just love your thoughts. Is there a noise ordinance that applies to that? It seems to me that 030 does, right?
I think that the noise control ordinance 030 general prohibition is intended to be broad and subjective so that it captures specific noises in specific circumstances that might not be a problem in other places at other times. So the decision maker would decide whether a particular noise in a particular time of day in a particular location is unreasonably loud or raucous. So I think they're intended to be broad. The problem, I think, and this is probably true for a lot of noise ordinances that local governments adopt, is that they're hard to enforce if it's such a brief amount of time. And maybe you know who drove by your house and where they live, and you can report that to the sheriff's office. Maybe you don't. So there's an enforcement piece that's for sort of discrete things like loud noises, tough to capture.
Yeah, well, it's broad all around the county. People sometimes know that maybe they're the neighbor of the person who owns the truck or the car or the motorcycle, whatever it may be, that's making all this noise. Right. And same thing goes with people that are firing weapons, right, outside the urban growth boundary or whatever that law is, right? So the same thing has come to us before, is that, I mean, it's, 5 or 6 hours of a group of people on private property that are legally firing weapons and is extremely noisy. Again, that's on a specific piece of property, but, it's not uncommon for the response from the sheriff's office to say, well, it's really not anything we can really act on. So if that's the case, what can we do so that it can be actionable? Because it's so vague and so broad. I think broad is the word you use. Vague is, I guess, is the word I'm using.
We could look into, I think my understanding is that although we're sort of making noise variances code enforcement's issue, the noise ordinance is usually enforced by the sheriff's office. And it's possible that if there is regular occurrence of specific loud and unreasonable noises on a particular piece of property and the sheriff's office doesn't want to go out and do anything about it, we could put them through a code enforcement type proceeding where we know it's specific people doing this, and we could cite them like we would in another code enforcement proceeding, and it would go to final order, and there'd be the possibility of fines, penalties, and fees. And of course, then the issue is how much bandwidth code enforcement has to do things like this. We could, this is a policy session, so this is great feedback. We could explore some of the enforcement problems and find out how we can remedy them.
Yeah, and I would appreciate that, actually. So, and I know that there are other areas, jurisdictions, states that actually have pretty stiff, right? I mean, you have a loud vehicle, for example, you pull over, you're cited. So it is being done. What can we do to strengthen our law enforcement folks, their ability to act on those?
And to ensure that they know that they have, under this ordinance, the ability to act on loud and unreasonably raucous noises.
And again, that's why I love that first sentence there, that generally regulates noise to protect the health, safety, welfare, and the quality of life for residents. And I know that previous commissioners, including myself, love to say people have the right to have the peaceful enjoyment of their property, and noise can interfere with that. Excessive noise can interfere with that.
Is that it, Commissioner Savas?
Yes.
So I'm thinking along the same vein, and I wrote down this question, and it's, you said it. It's a broad objective, but then who decides on how broad this does? Who decides on this? Is it up to, so I think this policy works really well inside a Petri dish. But I have a lot of experience that says this isn't doing anything for us on the enforcement side. You call the sheriff at the non-emergency number, they're out to lunch, they won't come out. You call code enforcement, they work 4 days a week. Most of these activities happen on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They're not in their office. And then, so how then, if we don't have county code enforcement, Gary, or the sheriff that goes out there, who has the burden of proof to say they were really loud? We used to have a decimal reading in these, and I remember when I was here the last time as a commissioner, it's because of marijuana grows, and they had these really high-powered fans, exhaust fans, and on the property line, the decimal reading was supposed to be X. I don't know how else to quantify loud noise. So especially when you're in an EFU, farm forest, forestry zones, that is the utmost important. So I don't think we've had enough time to add the enforcement arm on this. Yeah, we have a noise ordinance, so what? Gary?
Great, thank you, commissioners. Part of it is, as you know, there's a variance request form, so when someone's planning ahead, they can apply for an exception. But I think you're referring to when it happens in the moment, at midnight on a Saturday night, you're right. My staff's not going to be there unless, board, you direct me to hire staff for 24/7 operations. And then how will we fund that? That's your decision, but I'll do that if you want me to do it. The sheriff's office has multiple demands on their time, of course, so it's a matter of staffing and funding.
So we're passing this, but it's wholly not enforceable.
These amendments really don't have anything to do with the general enforcement of the noise ordinance. These amendments are specific to the noise variance procedure and who decides whether someone gets a noise variance, where that decision gets appealed to, and what the factors are.
listen, Caleb, how does a noise ordinance get issued if there's not a witness there to take it besides the person being affected?
Clackamas County Code, Section 6.05.090, details the administration and enforcement of the noise ordinance. It says that, and of course, we're proposing some amendments to account for the fact that code enforcement would issue decisions on noise variance applications under these amendments, but generally, the sheriff's office administers and enforces the noise ordinance through the process that applies to code enforcement. They would issue a
So that means the
citation.
sheriff's office deputy would have to go out to the affected property.
Yes.
And the practice is they don't, is my issue. So we're passing something here that is totally not enforceable because nobody wants to take the time to do their jobs of what the policy says.
Chair, maybe I didn't share something I should have said, and that is that what this is about, I think, is working. Let's just say it's they want a noise variance for a party, or they want a noise variance because they're new construction 24/7, or something like that. They can be cited. The sheriffs can show up and say, you can't make this excessive noise at 11 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning because it's between these hours. So they have done that, and they have been effective at it. But they have to have, in order to do it legally, they have to apply for a noise variance, right? Or whatever it's called.
Correct.
And we discussed this before in the past. And so what Caleb's here presenting is simply just the legal proceedings of how that is determined, and if it's appealed, who it is appealed to.
Precisely, just because the current practice doesn't match what's in the code. We're just aligning current practice
So
with
what
the code
if
for
they
now.
don't have a noise variance and they're in violation of everything in this document?
Then 6.05.090 would say it's the sheriff's office to enforce the ordinance by issuing citations and going through the process that would normally apply in code enforcement
This is such an
proceedings.
exercise in folly. I can't even believe it. I'm so wholly frustrated with that. Commissioner West?
Thank you. I think I understand what we're talking about here specifically and narrowly. I also share concerns about our code enforcement, and that we need to have a larger conversation about that. We've been talking about a couple times, that issue's come up a couple times today. So I have empathy and alignment with much of the chair's angst here. So it looks like it used to be that they would apply for the variance through the sheriff's office. Just to recap here really quick from my understanding.
That's the way the code currently reads. In practice, applications for noise variances go to code enforcement.
Go to code enforcement. Do we have the ability to handle, is this gonna, what's involved in the workload of doing a noise variance? So we have to go out and test the sound? I have no idea what that process looks like. And is this a new work burden on an already overburdened department?
My understanding is that code enforcement doesn't get a lot of applications like this. We've only received one appeal of code enforcement's decision in many years. It's a simple online form. I think some of the questions go to, will this benefit, maybe it's a concert to benefit a charity, something like that, because some of the factors for addressing whether the variance should issue go to whether or not there's a public benefit that would be realized absent the noise variance.
Okay.
So it's an online application. Code enforcement usually issues a letter decision saying approved or denied, which can then be appealed.
And colleagues, my questions are based out of the redlining on page 8 in the packet. I do like the language where you guys talk about on B maybe subset or number 2, it says whether granting the variance would endanger and adds to public health, safety, and or welfare. So I like how you guys reworded that. And then my other question was here, it does say here where the sheriff's decision may be appealed, but now it says Board of County Commissioners, but not to us. The decision is no longer appealed to us, but it goes to the compliance hearing officer. I'm curious if, I understand the history behind this, we don't need to revisit that. Is that pretty standard for a county to refer these types of appeals to the hearings officer, or were we unique prior to this?
I think appeals of many staff decisions go to hearings officers, not just in this county, but in other counties. In the land use context in this county, oftentimes the planning director will make an initial decision, which can then be appealed to a hearings officer. So I think an initial staff decision followed by an appeal to a hearings officer, someone the county hires to handle things like that, quasi-judicial determinations, is common.
What's the process to appeal the hearings officer's decision?
It would probably be an online application. that you want to appeal, or you would provide your appeal documentation to, and this, if these amendments go through, code enforcement staff who would then set up the hearing with the hearings officer.
So the hearing, they don't like the hearings officer's decision, and then where do they appeal then?
After the hearings officer makes a decision. Typically, appeals of many quasi-judicial local government decisions are challengeable in circuit court through writ of review proceedings.
Okay. I also, are they not challengeable to back, at a certain rare occasions, back to the board if necessary, to the elected representation of the individual that's making the appeal? Is that ever a case?
If some land use appeals go from a hearings officer to the board, not many of them, the way the code is proposed to be amended, the hearings officer's decision on a noise variance appeal would be final, and it would be challengeable in circuit court. It wouldn't necessarily go to the board of
I'll make a
commissioners.
suggestion here. I just tend to think that it's, in rare occasions or when necessary, may never happen in my lifetime, but if there's a situation where it goes before an unelected, a hearings officer that's not accountable to the voters, I think it is right for that constituent to be able to come before their elected representation that represents them to make that appeal if necessary. So having some caveat maybe in the appeals process that it actually comes to us still, because we are their elected representation. And so I think that there is some, for me, that would be most appropriate to give them the best representation they could in that situation. So that was my suggestion.
Thank you. Commissioner Scholl and then Commissioner Schrader.
Okay, on the paragraph entitled Sound Measurement, 6.05.050, it says that measurements may only be made inside of a noise-sensitive unit occupied by a person making a complaint under this chapter or within 3 feet of a closed window or closed door. That says that the sound decibel measurement can be only measured inside someone's home or place of business. But what about outside? You know, out where I live, in the very rural part of the county, there are people who have big parties, and I'm telling you, they have a good time.
Yes, they do.
And it gets pretty noisy, but wouldn't it be applicable to make a measurement outside?
The way the code is currently written, for purposes of the DBA restrictions,
Yeah.
the measurement would be inside the closest noise-sensitive unit with the windows closed. That's a policy choice. You could
Okay.
make it from the property line. And
I
does it-
see, okay.
It's something we could fix if you think that
Okay.
it's broken.
Page are you on, Commissioner Scholl?
Well, this is on page 7 of your briefing there, paragraph 6.05.050, sound measurement. Okay, that was just a question of interest, but in terms of what you presented on the red line changes, I agree with them. Thank you.
Commissioner Schrader.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. I did get an email from a constituent today who asked about compression brakes and the noises
What?
they make. Truck compression brakes, and whether or not that would constitute a violation of the noise. It's from the Stafford area because evidently Lake Oswego is building a huge complex there, and the number of folks around there have complained to me about the noise factor as the trucks go through. So I don't know. I just felt I needed to mention that I don't know how this ordinance could affect or help regulate something of that.
I think it goes back to my earlier point that it's not land-specific or event-specific. Those Jake brakes is the common terminology for a truck brake
Yeah.
of that size, so. Maybe Commissioner Schrader's and the constituent and other concerns I've heard all around the county to that other noise, if you can look into that for future efforts. I'm
Jake
perfectly
brakes, yeah.
comfortable with what we're doing here today. So, Chair,
I have a comment. I'm not done.
Okay.
I assume you want to make a motion.
I do.
Okay, I'll let you do that in a moment.
Okay.
I want to talk about the decibel meter for a minute. It says, any measurement shall be taken with describe what kind of meter. Since this was written, we have decimal meters on our phones, and that's what everybody's using. However, it doesn't say what reading is compliant with either a party or a commercial situation or anything like that. And the personnel making the measurement shall have completed training. Okay. Really? So if somebody is having a big fat party in Mark's area, in my area, and we call in and say, you know, the decimal meter on my phone is at 85, which is really loud, by the way. Oh, well, you haven't had any training on this, so how can you say that that's true?
So 6.05.040, noises specifically prohibited, provides decibel levels at different times of the day. There's 50 decibels between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., 60 decibels between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. If someone is able to take the sound measurement and they've had the training and it's over those amounts, then it's a per se violation of the zoning. But even if we don't have someone trained to use a decibel reader who is there, and you know, they take a decibel measurement, but they're not trained, it could still be a violation of the unreasonably loud or raucous noise. So some of them are subjective and don't depend on the decibel reading.
This is what makes me crazy, Caleb. This is making me crazy. You say we have to have training, and then you say, oh, well, you don't have to have training. So which is it?
If you're going to use a decibel meter, you need the training. If you're going to use it subjectively, it says, that is too loud, that's subjective without using the meter.
But then we
So-
can't prove it. And then by the time the sheriff gets out there, which they don't, or by the time code compliance, well, how do you know that? Jane?
So looking at 605.050, it looks like it was last amended in 2020. AI has happened, our phones have gotten super fancy. I think we can take a look at subsection B, which is what I believe you were referring to, and delete or edit that to make it, I think, more modern, and recognize the technology we all have now.
It's a problem with this entire ordinance. We're making suggestions of something that's 24 years old in this.
Well, it's only 4 years old.
Well, you said
but-
20
well, it was
year
codified in-
2000.
It was codified in 2000. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that language goes back to 2000. I apologize.
Yeah, Commissioner Schull,
Yeah,
Savas.
so Chair, I don't disagree with your concerns, and I think that earlier, if legal counsel's office does go back and look at all these things that we talked about here today, that would be appropriate and make adjustments. But what we're doing here today, this does not apply. This is more about the process of appeals and process of the application. So,
But I disagree with that, Paul. I really do disagree with that, because what we're saying, we have this noise ordinance, but we don't. I mean, it will work in a petri dish, and when I say that, I'm very serious about the real-world application of a policy that we're trying to put in place. You know, we haven't had enough time to do this. We've had a conversation for 20 minutes, and you've given a wonderful presentation based on the information that you have, and you haven't really got feedback from commissioners what we want to see in this. That's why we have policy sessions, to engage in a give and take in real-world applications. So I'm concerned about doing this. I'm not going to vote for this today, but commissioners, I think this is something that is going to be coming more and more, because what I'm seeing in the rural parts of Clackamas County is people like to come to Clackamas County in certain areas because our roads are very accessible from Portland, and they like to have parties and weddings and venues and rodeos, and then there's a host of illegal operations because we are centered, we are located closer to Portland, and that element is coming out here. So, you know, it's up to you what you want to do with this policy. So when I get a complaint, I'll give the commissioners their names of the people trying to complain to me, and you can answer for that.
you can buy phone number.
Commissioner West?
I'm not quite there to support this, and it's because when I look at the redlining here on page 8, I do believe ultimately there should be a pathway to have an appeal to the Board of County Commissioners as the elected representatives after the hearings officer, if that is and some process for that to bring regress to their electeds, I think is incredibly important. That's a value system for me. So that is enough for me to have to see a switch here. I may be alone, but for me, that's a big enough deal to not vote yes on it today.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, Chair, I suggest, I want to make one motion relative to the packet, and maybe make another motion if I have to bring back the other concerns and issues for clarification and updating. So I want to be able to get to that. So I move to move on option 1, direct staff to schedule a public hearing on the attached amendments and draft a corresponding ordinance.
Seconded.
Commissioner Savas, that we have moved, direct staff to schedule a public hearing on the attached amendments and draft a corresponding ordinance, and Commissioner Scholl has seconded the motion. Further discussion? Look, we have not done enough work on this to automatically go to a public hearing with the input that's needed for real-life application on this. Obviously, according to our chief counsel, if we still have ordinance in here from the year 2000, it needs to be more updated on this. I mean, look, and I've said this before, the real-life application of this is going to be very problematic. I appreciate the lawyers, doing what you need to do. I appreciate that you want to get this done and get it out the door. It's just not ready for prime time. Commissioner West.
I'm really close, Commissioner Savas, and my issue is with what is in the red line, what we're talking about, and to your motion. I'm close to a yes vote, but I've already articulated why I'm not. I don't know what you think about that, or if you want to hold pat to where you're at, or if you would consider my concern.
I understand your concern, and I don't think there's a big difference between having a noise ordinance appealed and the Board of County Commissioners hearing it than I do all the land use issues, which we have deliberately said that's a sticky wicky, and that would overwhelm us if we start opening the door towards having all those appeals and land use things approached by the Board of County Commissioners. We simply don't have the time.
But Commissioner, we do provide rare, but a pathway when necessary, when we need to step in or when we need to give that opportunity. And as the electeds, ultimately, I think the buck stops with us when they want to bring regress. And I don't think that should be blocked. And it's not blocked even in land use.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important to bring it back, the other piece to bring it back, because if we craft good ordinances and based on good policy, then those other issues can be carefully go through the system appropriately, so we don't have to deal with what you're referring to.
I agree. I really want to get there with you. I just think that we're never going to draft a perfect policy.
Yeah.
We can never foresee into the future perfect. That's why we have these pathways. I want to make sure that they have access to us when it is appropriate to make regress to their electeds in an appellate process. To me, that's very important. I think this falls under our purview ultimately. We do have to utilize a hearings officer, or we would be completely overwhelmed, but to never have regress or access back to your electeds and issues around land use or this, to me, is like I can't get beyond that. I think it's reasonable for that to go. We're close. I'm not right there.
I understand where you're coming from.
Commissioner Scholl?
Yeah, I just want to say I support the amendments today and the recommended motion. The rest of the elements of the ordinance that we've talked about, that's another sticky wicket for another day. Thank you.
So when's the other day, Commissioner Scholl?
Tomorrow morning.
Just checking with you. Okay, we have a motion on the table. Would the clerk please take the poll?
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
No.
Commissioner Scholl.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
No, motion passes 3-2.
Second motion, I move that we direct staff to bring back, or direct staff to prepare a work session to address the remaining noise ordinance issues that address vehicles, Jake brakes, all other noises that.
And the things that were discussed today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Items discussed today.
And there may be some more.
Right.
I'll second.
Okay, Commissioner Savas has made a second motion, and I'm not going to repeat it, and Commissioner West has seconded that. Are we clear?
Yes.
Okay, we're clear. Any further discussion? Tony, would you please take the poll?
Commissioner Schull,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Caleb, for coming forward. Okay, Gary,
Chair
What's
Smith,
up?
would you please convene as a Library Service District Board of Directors?
I will recess as a Board of County Commissioners and convene as a Library Service District Board of Directors.
This policy session is the Clackamas County Library District funding, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 is today, and you'll have another session tomorrow afternoon on Part 2. So whatever you don't finish or when you want to take a break, you'll continue tomorrow. Presenting is staff from the Department of Transportation and Development and County Council. They are Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development, Sarah Ekman, Assistant Director of Transportation and Development, and Jeff Munns, Assistant County Counsel, Office of County Counsel. Go ahead, team.
Thank you so much. Chair Smith and Commission, we are here to get some policy direction from you on some master IGA revisions. We've talked about this in the past. You sent us away with specific directions to negotiate these proposed changes to this IGA and bring them back for consideration. In light of that, though, we felt it was important to give kind of a holistic discussion around kind of the library system and the library components and the funding components around it. So if you can endeavor to give us a couple minutes. We'd like to go through this presentation. Each of us are going to take a particular portion of it, but to give you kind of a background on the library district as a whole. So the library district for Clackamas County was established in 2008 upon passing a ballot measure 3-310. The approval of the measure resulted in the Board of County Commissioners adopting a master order to form the district. That master order is a part of your packet before you today. It's attachment C. The cities in the Clackamas County that operate libraries entered into an intergovernmental agreement with each other and the county. The Master IGA outlines funding, operations, governance, amendment, termination, and enforcement details for participants, and that's also in your packet. It's a pretty beefy packet today of information. Just so you know, the district is funded by the permanent property tax rate of 0.3974 per thousand of assessed value. And is divided into 13 individual library service areas that were established. Most, but not all, service areas include city residents and residents of an unincorporated Clackamas County. I believe the only portion that's excluded is the Johnson City area, where they had an amendment to come forward and be included, but that was turned down, I think, in the last election process. All the district funds received are distributed to the county to district libraries. That's done through our office. Essentially, no district funds are utilized for the administration of the library district in the pass-through of these dollars. So essentially, we collect those dollars, run them through a methodology that's done by our finance department and DTD, Deidre Landon. We take no cut of that money, and we push every single cent of that money out to the particular library service providers in the area. The Master IGA stipulates that library cities must use district revenue to provide library services, which all of our library cities, including Clackamas County as a library city, use those dollars and develop budgets for their particular libraries. Although it should be noted, and there's one section I want to cite from here, that it does identify the fact that there costs to the extent such as overhead or administrative costs are directly related to the provision of library services and or operation of the public levy. There is the ability to collect overhead or administrative costs that directly support the operations of the library. Clackamas County, in addition to the master IGA that we discussed here briefly, this is going back a number of years ago, a decade ago, the Clackamas County Board of County Commissioners also provided each library city with an additional one-time funds via capital contribution IGAs. There's an example of one that's in your packet. This was with the city of Sandy. But essentially, as you'll see with those materials, there were a number of different IGAs for different purposes. So these IGAs can become confusing. If you need clarification on that, please let us know. Essentially with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to do a brief discussion about library network services, evolution of these services, and the Library District Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Hello. So as a result of the 2008 measure and the capital IGAs that were formulated, the county agreed to continue to provide library support services through what we commonly know as library network services. This program was originally established in 1989, so the county had it in place long before 2008. And along with the county libraries, it was initially funded through local option levies, and they were later rolled into the general fund following the passage of Measure 50 in 1997. So in 2008, with the passage of 3310, that changed. Library Network really focuses, their services are robust, and their primary role is facilitating the sharing of materials throughout the library system. So that's all of the libraries within the county, both the Gladstone and Oklaahoma county libraries, as Dan mentioned, the cities that we're serving, and then also all of the city libraries. So they share those materials, and they provide IT and internet service to our libraries as well, both to staff in libraries and to patrons. So if you come into a library as a patron and sit down at a computer and use the internet to search for something, check your email, our library network services are providing that through all of the libraries within the county. They do a whole host of things to make all of that happen, as you can imagine. So since 2008, things have evolved significantly. Demand and costs have gone up for digital materials. The demand has surged, but interest in books and paper materials that we think of more traditionally remains very high. So resource demands are higher both for our libraries and for Library Network, and the cost, as you can imagine, along with everything else, has skyrocketed. Everything is more advanced and requires more resources. So our technology needs are increasing, and we've increased our outreach efforts, and they've become more critical so that we can ensure we're reaching our underserved populations, including patrons in remote areas, aging residents, and users with special needs. Librarians are also looked to as leaders in early literacy to support schools with reduced means. So as you can imagine, our budget has been increasing over time. Management of online resources is more demanding, and our courier services are quite complex. I would invite you over to Library Network if you ever want to see the sort and process. It's quite something. As a consortium, the libraries in the county work very hard to keep up with the needs, but it is a struggle given the budgetary constraints and the expectations established throughout their region and abroad. The Library District Advisory Committee was also mandated in the Master IGA that came out of the 2008 efforts. On that Library District Advisory Committee, each city nominates one representative who's then appointed to the committee by the district board. This group convenes, and the charge through the Master IGA says that they must meet at least annually to consider 3 things, and these bullets are in your packet. They are evaluation of progress reports submitted by member libraries, proposed changes to the intergovernmental agreement, the IGA, and the impact of the annexation or withdrawal of territory from the district, including the review of service area maps and the distribution formula, along with a recommendation of whether a newly incorporated city qualifies as a service provider. And Jeff's going to talk a little bit about some proposed revisions to the Master IGA.
Yes, thank you. This brings us back to the first topic. That
Please
Dan-
introduce yourself.
Sorry, Jeffrey Munns, Assistant County Counsel. Thank you. I think it's on. Yep. And so yes, brings us back to the question that we're here for, some direction from the board. Revisions to the Master IGA. Starting early this year, we worked with the city managers and put together some draft language that's in the revised IGA that you have in the packet. What this was in response to is to clarify the questions regarding using library district revenue for capital expenses. This comes from kind of a split in the community regarding how this is appropriate or not appropriate. It stems from the formation of the library district itself. When the library district was formed, it clearly talks about establishing this district to provide library services. In the master order, attachment C to that master order talks about using it for library services, but to also achieve the Oregon Library Association's threshold standards. As part of those threshold standards, it includes a facilities component. This was an issue in the beginning of the district because at the time, Estacada City Library had created a capital district. Under Oregon law, you can't collect a tax from the same people twice for the same thing. So they had a tax for a capital district, and we were collecting a tax for library services. So that potentially drew a distinction where people would say we couldn't use these funds for a capital purpose. Well, the library district in Estacada is now gone, so that potential confusion or potential duplicate tax is no longer a problem. Also, the library services definition from the Oregon Library Association and the facility requirements is that you need to provide an adequate facility to provide library services. Otherwise, it's not really a library. You don't have that facility. I guess it would be a bookmobile potentially, or something different, right? So they're pretty well defined in the Library Association's definitions of those library services for facilities. So what we did in working with this is, one, analyze it from our office's perspective and said, no, it's appropriate to use them for library facility uses. That could be a capital expense as long as it's to achieve those threshold standards in providing library services, and that can include money spent on a facility. And so what we did is work with the city managers with a potential revision that doesn't necessarily change the essence of that, because those standards were already incorporated in the master order, but rather calls them out specifically as a revision to the IGA so that they're clear for the library cities and others working with this library district to see as to what those facility standards would be in this case. So that's the purpose of the revision, is to call them out clearly, to have them as a better reference for the library cities. This potential change was taken to LDAC recently on July 29th, and the LDAC did not recommend accepting the changes because some of the comments were, it doesn't change anything. To some extent, that's true. It doesn't change it, but rather calls it out. It says the facilities language is too vague. Another comment was they'd rather not go to the cities at this time to take up this issue because there's other bigger issues or additional issues, and they were looking for more substantial changes. So the reasons cited to support that, to support the revisions were, let's see, it doesn't maybe not solve the core issues, but it moves this forward, and it's the first step of many for the district to move forward with meeting some of these service standards. And with that, that's the essence of the change and the direction sought at this time for the board to consider the revisions to the master IGA.
Okay. Anything else?
So the revisions that we're discussing can be found on attachment A of the packet materials before you. I guess there's one additional thing I'd like to highlight, because we are focused on the use of our general fund dollars. It's important to highlight the fact that LINK itself is not funded by the library district. It is funded by general fund. I want to make sure we're clear in the use of those dollars. So there's more in here that we can discuss now or later, but as of right now, we're looking for policy direction on this particular one issue.
Okay. And I have some questions, but Commissioner Salas, you have your light on.
Yeah, I thought I was hoping that we would, based on the last time we discussed this, we would have a greater discussion about all the moving parts of the library district, funds, system, library services, and so forth. So this comes as a little bit of a surprise that we are not having that educational aspect and understanding all the moving pieces, and instead tweaking something without having that information does not, I don't think serves us well. You'll note in the packet, it does mention that Monday before last, these revisions were presented again to the Library District Advisory Committee, and it was basically a 5-3 vote not to accept. I'm paraphrasing because the way the motion was worded, to not accept the revisions. I've been following, quite a bit of the mechanics of the library district for a long time, and I think there's a number of folks that have been around also for a long time that also understand that adjustments need to be made in the IGA that have not been probably shared in the dialogue with the city managers. I think that appeared to be, I wasn't there, but appeared to be a narrow discussion. I appreciate the work that Mr. Munz has done. Don't have any quarrel with his work. Don't have any quarrel with the charge that he went about making these changes. So, but also, I also realize that the scope of the meeting with the city managers was, again, I'll just reword that to say that the scope was narrow. It wasn't broad to address a number of the other issues. I think that for the purpose and the scope, these changes I don't have an issue with. However, there's more to need to be done, and I think that if we were to generally at this time, accept the changes and put it in a parking lot, I think I mentioned this before, for a more of a global solution, I think we would be better suited. This does not solve the issue with Hoodland Library, Canby Library, other issues out there. It does not solve that. And I'm hoping that there is enough interest and momentum to bring everyone to the table, including the city manager, to bring everyone to the table for that holistic kind of an approach. If we can do that, I think we can get towards a solution. So Gary and I have talked about this. I've attended probably almost not every LDAC meeting, but most of them. So I do understand this. My advice is to, direct staff to form a group to identify, and I mentioned this to LDAC. Let's get a group together to help identify what all the problems are and the challenges are, and then let this particular group, maybe staff-driven, ad hoc group, to try to come up with a strategic approach on how to address going forward with all the other moving pieces. So Gary, could you share some of that conversation you and I had about this? And I know you had conversation with staff and others and managers as well. Your thoughts?
Yes, so the prior board, as you know, created a task force to discuss all of these issues back in late 2018, 2019. That was like a 40-plus member group with a 3-year work plan. They had one meeting, I think, maybe two, and then the pandemic hit and it stopped. And feedback that I've received from my colleagues who are city managers were that was too big of a group with too long of a timeline. So if the board directed, we could form a much smaller group with a much shorter timeline to advise, consider options, and then bring that back to LDAC and to this board to consider, if you'd like us to do that. Much smaller group, shorter timeline, as you said, Commissioner Savas. That'd be much more manageable if that was the approach.
Yeah, and I would support an approach like that, but one thing I shared to almost every group or person I've talked to is that I don't think there is no list of what everyone thinks the problems are or how to fix them, right? And we don't have a list. We don't have a compilation anywhere of all the issues we're trying to fix here. And so it puts all of us and my colleagues here in a very difficult position to try to be how to fix something if you don't understand what the problems are. So that's my recommendation from observing all of this. And the other challenge, I'll just say, is that we've got over 75 elected officials, if you count the county commissioners, if you count the city councilors, the mayors. You also have all the city managers. You also have all the librarians of the cities. You also have all of the city library advisory committees and all the members of LDAC. That's a lot of people. That's close to 200 people, probably, at least 150 people. So all those opinions out there are all over the map. So every time I talk to someone, I realize that where they're coming from is unique, but is based on a little bit of understanding and a lot of misunderstanding. So, Chair, that's my suggestion. I would like to, if there is an option here, an option 5, that we just put this in a parking lot. I don't have any quarrel with any of the amendments made, but there needs to be more amendments to this.
Other commissioners need to opine on this. Commissioner Savas, Scholl, you're up.
Yes, thank you for the briefing. My question is there any time-sensitive issue or issues that would benefit the library district by the Board of Commissioners approving your recommended changes today instead of delaying on them? Because like Commissioner Saba says, there's a lot of moving parts here that are not addressed in your option 1, which is to direct staff to advance the revisions of the master IGA as presented today. So again, let me rephrase my question. Is there a benefit today for the board to to go ahead and direct option number 1 and get that portion of the master IGA updated while we look at a future date to Commissioner Savas's idea for a more comprehensive scrub down of the IGA.
Chair, if I may, can I reply to Commissioner Scholl's question?
And then other commissioners want to opine, so let's move it on.
Yeah, see, I'm just looking at the lights. So
Well-
I did
All
ask,
right, let's just turn on all the lights. Mine, there we go. Lights are on.
all the lights are on now. Thank you. I'm glad you got mine, too. I did ask Counselor Munns, or this very question. And he basically, his response is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I worded the question was, is there any changes that are in this IGA? I'm trying to remember exactly how I worded that, but essentially, are any changes that restrict any of the libraries or any of the cities to do what they need to do today? And the answer was, not really.
No, and I think to answer, my answer that at the time in the meeting, as well as to answer Commissioner Scholl, I think that the only thing that was timely today is to have an answer from the board on the question of the use of these funds for what could be deemed a capital expense, as long as it's consistent with those standards that are part of the master order, and then when the master IGA now. That's what would be timely, is to make a statement to clarify that question. Otherwise, these standards are what have been a part of the library district since its formation, and that doesn't change anything.
Okay, Commissioner Scholl.
So with that thought in mind, your recommendation for option 1 would be a good idea today?
Yes, if this board would like to make that statement today to clarify that question, yes.
Okay.
But I think that, to Commissioner Savas's point, there are additional matters that that the library district needs to confront, and it would be acceptable to wait if that's the decision of the board.
And it doesn't limit the board's authority to go back, take a look at the additional items, and revise the IGA further. This is simply an action that you directed us to go do. We work with the city managers. We got concurrence with the city manager, and we come back for consideration. This additional discussion is a separate thing, and that's the board direction is sought on that. But essentially, the board has the ability to work with these IGAs to every extent feasible.
Okay, thank you.
So I too have talked to a lot of people about this. We have our monthly mayors and chairs meeting. Gary has reached out to the city administrators on this. I want a point of clarification. I have 2 legal questions. Do the cities have a legal say in the management of the libraries?
They manage their own libraries, and so to that extent, yes. The library district is something that you as the board are the board of directors for, but in the management of the libraries, each city has its own library, other than those, of course, that the county manages. So yes, the cities have say over the management of their library.
Okay, so the cities have agreed they would like to see the revised IGA, which reflects the language that's been presented today, correct, Gary?
That is correct from the city managers, yes.
From the city managers. I posed the same question to the mayors multiple times in the last year. Basically, do whatever you want. We're managing our libraries fine. There is not a lot of heartache over doing this. I think they would like to see this IGA able to use for facilities, for operations. If the HVAC system goes out, they would like to be within their legal purview to install that. This is what this is designed to do. Every single mayor told me, yes, we would like to do that, except for Lake Oswego. They backfill their own funds by $1 million every year in their own city funds for the library. However, that is rare in this county. I realize that, so therefore the need for the change in the IGA. So I am for the IGA today. Now, somebody asked, what's the big hurry? Well, gee, commissioners, back in June, you're all chomping at the bit, giving me a bad time because, oh, I wanted to have a session on libraries and it hasn't been scheduled. Well, guess what, commissioners? It's scheduled here today, and so I dropped off other items off the county agenda so we could bring the library issue forward and do what we need to do. We have a session scheduled for tomorrow to do what we need to do, but I'm more than happy to cancel that tomorrow since we cannot codify exactly what we want to do. do. Now, I want to address the LDAC for a moment. We have a lot of advisory boards and commissions that give advisory advice to the Board of County Commissioners. We don't always take that. In fact, take a look at our Planning Commission. They will tell you, they recommend that we vote a certain way. Many times, we do not take their advice because we have different information or we're looking at the problem differently. So because the LDAC says one thing, it does not necessarily mean that the Board of County Commissioners will always agree with that. Okay? I am sorry that the LDAC did not agree that we should go ahead with this IGA. They think it's not necessary or it does not fit their worldview of how libraries should be managed. I find that sad, frankly, because we're trying to move this issue along and update it into this decade. And it's very sad if some of the LDAC members are in disagreement with that. I want to be very careful that we're not raising expectations here unintentionally, that we're going to be all things to all people. I can't imagine having a work group consisting of everybody who wants to be involved in this and think that you're going to get anything accomplished within the next 2 or 3 years. If indeed that there's not enough money to go around, that's a very narrow, separate issue that should be addressed. And the cities who need to be involved in that need to be involved in that. So I think we have competing issues today, but what I would like to see is I would like to see us approve the IGA, which allows the current funding level to go forward and work on facilities, structural issues that some of these libraries may have that they can't afford to do. Commissioner West, you're up.
Sorry, I stepped out. Like I missed something. I don't have issue with what is sitting in front of me today. I think there's a lot of agreement on this board on that, which is good work. Dan, thank you for the work of your staff. I do think it is incomplete. I know that the commissioners have been wanting to get this before us to review this. The packet's quite lengthy. And I mean, we have a packed week. We want to get it taken care of. An effort definitely was made by the chair to make sure that we could have these meetings scheduled this week before we go into the August recess, right?
Yes.
So I'm a little bit conflicted. I personally, even though those are real, if we need to take another look at this, I don't have a problem tabling it. But I also understand the frustration of the chair. I sounds like 2 of my colleagues are interested in having a more in-depth look at this. But let's moving forward, making sure that we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. I think there's good stuff in this. And so that's kind of my thoughts on it. But I also, I'm acutely aware and understand the chair's frustration here. Commissioner Schrader, not to put you on the spot, I'd be very interested to see and hear what your thoughts are. You're quite well versed in this issue and have a lot of work with the library systems along with Commissioner Savas. How do you feel about potentially tabling and getting this just right? What do you think?
I'm torn because I think the real issue is, as I understand it, is that when this was voted for, the understanding was it was only going to be used for operations and not for facilities. Is that correct? At least that's the argument or assertion, not argument, we're just talking here. So now what we would be doing here is allowing the dollars to be used for sticks and bricks and facilities, which wasn't initially the vote. I never really quite understood that because frankly, if you don't have a facility that's in good shape, you don't have the size or whatever, you don't really have a library. So to me, I almost think that's kind of an artificial thing. Well, you can use it for operations, but yeah, if you want to use it for and that's essentially what happened, which some people, I think folks have argued that it's outside of the purview of the measure that we passed. That, Oregon City, I think, did use some of the dollars for capital construction. But on the other hand, like I said, you increase service, you increase size, you have more room for books. And the other piece of this is that the cities sometimes will use that rather than, in other words, they will supplant the money they're giving and just use the county dollars. And so we have seen some cuts in libraries. So this is kind of a split the baby Solomon kind of issue. I would be inclined to allow facilities to be part of this, just because I said, if you don't have a nice facility, that's why we built 2 new libraries, for crying out loud, right? We didn't have the space, didn't have the facility, didn't have this, didn't have that. So I'd be inclined to change it. However, the dilemma remains, if it wasn't really the intention of the measure, do we have to go back to the voters? That's where I think.
Not for the IGA?
Well, not for the IGA, but if we want to change, we can change the IGA, I assume.
Yes.
But the assertion has been that people said, well, we voted for this and now you're changing it. So I would be willing to go ahead and move ahead with this just to get some movement ahead, and then just keep working on it with LDAC and see what we can do. And I, frankly, if I had my druthers, change the IGA now, I think we need to go back for another library measure then in the near, next few years.
And that is a valid discussion.
Right.
However, that's not what we're
But
being asked
we're
for
talking about
today.
the IGA now, yeah.
Jeffrey Munns, you have your light on.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to respond and to kind of talk about the history and what people believe the measure did, Measure 310. The text of this doesn't describe in any way that it's limited to operations. It talks about library services only. And same thing as the master order. The master order talks about library services, and those services must meet the threshold level from the Oregon Library Association. Those threshold level services include the facility component. So all along, this requirement for facilities has been part of this. And the Oregon Library Association standards themselves that are part of this revision, to your example, require that you must provide a public restroom, sufficient heating and ventilation. That would be an example of like the HVAC example, which would have to be potentially addressed if it went out. And there's a whole list of those, of course, in the packet. It's the last page of that restatement and amendment to the IGA. So it wasn't part of the original measure that would be limited to operations only, but I think that's been the opinion of many, and that's something that we've been talking about with them. Our analysis of this is that that was not restricted in the measure itself, and of course, these facility requirements are then incorporated by reference into the master order.
Well, that's kind of what I think, because if you don't have the structure, you don't have, that's what libraries are for, to give a community structure to access to information. So I could get there. I'm okay doing that today, but I have no, I don't think this discussion is going to be over anytime soon. Really.
I don't think it is the intent of having this discussion be over any time soon. I have been very generous with the board time on scheduling today and tomorrow, which we can discuss tomorrow in a moment. But we do have a presentation that has been in the works, how many years? Since I've been chair, going on 3 3/4 years. Commissioners, we need to make a decision on this particular issue before us. Commissioner Savas.
Well, first start, I think Mr. Munns earlier, not just now, not just most, but earlier he said, just us acknowledging we're okay with the changes is, I think, adequate to signal to the cities that we're okay, so they can continue doing what they want to do as they need to do. That's how I interpret it. That's what he said, correct?
I think that adopting this would send that message, but as Dan also mentioned, we can come back to these other issues, and that's the option 3 in the packet, is to come back with further revisions potentially. But yes, that question is something that we were tasked with looking at a revision to the IGA, and that's what we went out and did, and this is
Okay.
where we're at. So yes, I think that's consistent.
I think it'd be of value to signal to everyone that we're okay with the revisions in the.
Right.
What do you want?
Just your attention.
Okay.
Well, you have my attention. I can do 2 things at once. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it'd be of value to signal to this board, to signal to the city managers that we're okay with the revisions in the IGA, but more work needs to be done.
What work do you want to do?
I think work that in that exchange that Gary and I talked about. Now, I agree with Gary. We can't do a huge deal that's going to take years with a whole bunch of people. So again, directing staff to come up with a strategy to figure out what all the problems are and figure out how to solve them and what structure that might be to lay that out. My concern about if we just take this action today is that maybe some people will get what they wanted and they won't come to the table. Okay, that's my concern. The last time we jumped into a big library decision hastily, it was only a matter of days or a week later, we have a lawsuit from the city of Gladstone, and I don't want to have a rebellion again.
So
My
Paul-
concern is, and Commissioner Schrader just touched on it, there are people out there that believe that the measure said this, we voted for this, and there will be people arguing that you are diverting from the will of the voters. You are taking, that this is what the voters vote. You're going to have that argument, and you're going to be faced with that. And we should not be subverting the will of the voters, but the same token is, I'm not sure we've done the homework. Now, when we discuss this, Chair, I appreciate you scheduling it, but I think the intention was to educate ourselves, then make the decision, not make the decision, then educate ourselves later. That's what we have here today. That's not being critical.
I would disagree. We have discussed this
Of course, I understand
forever.
that you would disagree.
But what is the conversation that you had with Gary that I am not privy to? Evidently, you and Gary have some agreement going on that I don't think.
I'm not saying it's an
the
agreement.
board-
We had a discussion.
You had a discussion on issues. Well, what are those issues? We have time until 3:30 today
Okay, fine.
to discuss
I'll
all
list them.
those issues.
I'll list them off of memory.
Good.
Okay? You have certain cities that feel that the unincorporated folks are using their library and their services and are not paying their fair share. I would say that some of those would be an argument about the formula that's embedded in the IGA, the formula itself. And I would argue that people actually studied the formula, they might think maybe differently. So education, that's a critical issue. The other issue, the Hoodland Library issue, simply, or can be issue, is that they don't have enough resources to operate their library. Okay, so are costs going up? Are the old LA standards that are listed in the IGA have also changed? So should there be a baseline of operational hours, days and weeks across the board on behalf of the district, right? The other issue is that people feel is that there's not a good understanding of what allocated costs are. I don't think that allocated costs can be streamlined to be all the same across all the cities because all the cities' budgets are unique and different. So I'm not here suggesting or believing or promoting that we should streamline or allocated costs should not be accepted. I mean, people need to pay their bills, libraries need to operate, the cities need to have the flexibility to operate their libraries as they feel. So there's confusion as there as well. There's also areas in which the county where two particular libraries share a unincorporated area and disagreement or a calibration that those folks that are collecting one city collecting those funds is actually those constituents actually go into the other library for the other city. So I think there's a boundary issue with some of these libraries. And also, there's also a growth issue where the population's changed. So the boundaries, once drafted and approved in 2008, have changed. If you look at the population densities have changed across the board. That's another issue. I could go on, but there again, I don't think it should come from me. I think that we ought to be surveying all the people involved here to figure out what those issues are and how to solve them. Gary and I did not reach a decision. We had a discussion about how to solve this problem and how to get everyone in a good place so that we can find a constructive solution to this and bring everyone together. Simple as that. I was hoping we could do that. And again, I was under the assumption that we would have 2 educational sessions on this, not a decision and educational sessions afterwards. That's what got us in trouble with the Gladstone lawsuit.
I would disagree about the Gladstone lawsuit. I also think that the community is looking for leadership from this board, and we're very lacking in that today if we don't approve the IGA. Like I said, we have a possible session scheduled for tomorrow, but frankly, I don't know what we're going to talk about. If commissioners aren't willing to come with a package of information, I think you're relying on staff to do a lot of the work for you, but we're not giving direction to staff to what to do. If we don't have enough money, then what is the solution to money? If the boundary changes aren't adequate, what is your solution for a boundary change? I think tinkering on boundary changes is kind of dangerous. I think when this library district was formed, every single city got a chunk of money to do with what they wanted with that. And I thought it was very generous at the time. I was not a commissioner at the time, but I remember when it happened, and I also have reviewed those documents. So those days are over. Every library did what they wanted with that. So I don't know, commissioners, I don't know what you want. So we scheduled something today that staff, 2 attorneys, this staff here, so we have 6 people, staff people in the room, scheduled a session today to get to a partial solution on a big problem, and we're yanking it out. So frankly, this library issue is not going to be any further resolved today than when you all wanted this back in June, right after budget. Oh, we need to solve the library issue right now. So here we are, working very long hours to get all these issues in that this board insisted that we did, and now we're not able to make a decision. So that's how I'm looking at it. Gary, do you have a recommendation? Should we consider a motion?
You can think about it overnight and discuss it tomorrow on part 2.
Okay.
I move we table the issue for today.
I don't think you need a motion for that. We're just going to table it. And we'll come back tomorrow. Commissioners, you really need to have some details. You need to have some real thoughts and not just say, oh, this happened in 2008 and this happened in 2009. I don't think it does us any good to bring up past history. We need to think about the problems today and move forward to see how we're going to solve the issues that are at us today. And that's how I do business. And yeah, I'm frustrated today. I'm very frustrated because my colleagues told me one thing, we're doing this today, and now we're not doing any of it because I think we're being led, frankly, down the road on a path that we are not going to solve by ourselves on this. And the tax increase is not going to be an answer. Just saying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to table this for tomorrow afternoon. And commissioners, bring your thinking hats on, bring your ideas hat forward. Gary, anything else?
That is it for today, Chair.
We are adjourned.